Many of you probably know, but the opioids epidemic has had a devastating impact on communities and families across Minnesota and the entire United States. Minnesota is one of many states that have been pushing back against pharmaceutical manufacturers and distributors who played a large role in this epidemic by suing these companies. The three gentlemen here today have played an outside role in that effort. First up, we're going to have Minnesota's Attorney General Keith Ellison speak, and after graduating from the University of Minnesota Law School, Mr. Ellison had spent 16 years as an attorney specializing in civil rights and defense law before moving on to the Minnesota House of Representatives. After Martin Sabo retired, he was elected to serve as Minnesota's 5th District Congressman, where he championed consumer, worker, and other protections for Minnesota. He was elected in 2018 and is currently serving as our Attorney General. With him, to my left, is an attorney from the Consumer Wage and Antitrust Division. He's actually really been diving deep into the litigation. His name is Evan Romanoff. He graduated from the University of Minnesota Law School, Michigan Law School. Used to work for a law firm in New York before coming to the Attorney General's office. Yeah, he wishes he could have graduated from Minnesota like us cool kids here. And then finally, we're also going to have some comments by Representative Dave Baker, who is been very instrumentally involved in these efforts at the legislature. He serves on the OLRAC organization that handles some of the funds around opioids, and they're all going to kind of tell you a little bit about the legislation, about some of the other activities that the state is doing around opioids. So I'm going to hand the microphone off.
Thank you for that very generous and kind introduction, and let me also thank you, Representative Baker, for having us. It's great to be here, and Wilmer, great to be here with all of you. I know that you all represent the unit of government that's closest to the people, and you all hear people's stories. You know what's going on in their lives. You know when things are going great. You know when things are not so great. And I have no doubt in my mind that many of you in this room have had to be there with families that they have suffered through crisis of overdose connected with the opioid crisis. I know you've been there. I want you to know that I've suffered this crisis, not personally, but people very close to me. And it is something that, for me, is not just some lawsuit that we filed. It's not just a lawsuit where somebody, I don't know, runs a red light, they make an accident, you sue them, whatever. It goes to the very heart of community, the very heart of caring, and the heart of accountability for the companies that we sued to get compensation back from Minnesotans. This was part of a multi-state lawsuit because this crisis happened all over the country, and it also happened right here. And I want to thank the leadership of Representative Baker, who has been at the very front of ORAC and has been leading, shepherding, speaking up. He and I have been working together on this. As we were talking about the settlement, I would call you sometimes, and you were always available, and I want to thank you for that. And what I didn't know is that you used to run this conference center right here. So
it's running much better now.
I was going to say, if you like the chicken, they'd say thanks to Dave, right? But anyway, so I want to talk to you. I want to center this conversation not on numbers, not on the lawsuit. I want to center it on people. And I want you all to know that I hear from Minnesotans every day who suffered the devastating effects and personal losses because of opioids. Just in September, just this year, I heard from a foster mom of a young boy named Sebastian. He was born in 2017, addicted to opioids when he was born. He spent 12 days in the NICU, the neonatal intensive care unit, and was on methadone for several months after he was born. He has suffered numerous health issues since birth and has needed extensive medical treatment, speech therapy, occupational therapy. Also in September, I heard from a woman whose husband was an Army sergeant and a heavy-duty truck mechanic. After being injured on the job in northern Minnesota, he was given OxyContin to handle the pain. His wife said his doctors prescribed it like it was candy. And he quickly became addicted, and eventually his doctors took him off opioids entirely without any slow tapering, which would be appropriate. He suffered devastating withdrawal and ended up committing suicide. There are dozens of terrible tragedies like these across the state. And I think that as we walk into this conversation and talk about how we're going to use the money that we're now about to try to receive in the next year, 6 months or so, we need to think about these families. So these folks are who I'm thinking about. I know they're who you're thinking about, and we're dedicated to making sure that our state gets the maximum amount of resources it needs to fight the crisis. And more importantly, that the money goes where it is most needed, where the pain is. You know, as Attorney General, let me tell you, I'm a statewide office holder. I represent Wilmer, I represent Ely, I represent Minneapolis, St. Paul, and the whole state. And so, quite honestly, when folks from different units of government say, we need this, we need that, I'm like, I'm totally sympathetic for you, but I cannot let the money go to whoever has the biggest, baddest lawyer, who can write more grants, who can lobby harder. It has to go to these folks who I just described to you in these pages. And I know that there are parts of our state that are spatially remote, who may not have a big person to write grants, but that doesn't mean they didn't suffer the losses just as much, if not more than others. And I'm committed to making sure that the money is distributed in a way where it goes where the pain is. So this has truly impacted everyone in our state. You all know this. I'm just bringing it to the front of mind. I'm not telling you anything that you don't know. Just bringing it to the front of our minds, and now is the time we need to do something about it. And so I'm asking you to join us to sign on to these settlement agreements. Now, as you know, when you settle a lawsuit, the people who you're suing, if you want to settle the lawsuit, they have to get something. What do they get? Finality. They pay, but in exchange, the case is over. And that is what is in front of us right now and what I want to talk to you about. And so the more participation that we get from all the units of government, the more money we can dedicate to fighting the crisis. If you hold out, not only will the state of Minnesota overall get less, maybe our community will get less, and you'll still have that lawsuit to fight. Maybe you'll be able to get more on your own, but we've been fighting these folks for years, and I can tell you that I think that this is the best settlement that is available. Let me tell you a little bit of statistics. I've talked about the personal and the individual. Now let's talk about the numbers a bit. In 2020 alone, opioid overdose deaths nationally rose to a record 93,000, a nearly 30% increase in the prior year. 100,000 Americans died of overdoses in 12 months during the pandemic. The first time that drug-related deaths have reached 6 figures in any 12-month period. In Minnesota, 4,821 Minnesotans have died of opioid overdoses from 2000 to 2019. The crisis is far from over today. Preliminary reports show 654 opioid-involved deaths in Minnesota in 2020 alone, 60% increase from 2019. Deaths involving synthetic opioids, including fentanyl, increased 81%, and deaths involving heroin increased 15%. Although the metro area is certainly severely impacted, some of the highest rates of both overdose deaths and non-fatal overdoses are in greater Minnesota. So the fact that you all represent greater Minnesota cities is what brings us here today. We are the folks who need to be talking to each other. And I'm telling you, I'm committed to stand up against anybody to make sure that the people you represent get their fair share. Because Lord knows the pain has been distributed in communities you represent. Am I right about that? So, let me also say, yes, it's true, Native Americans in Minnesota are 7 times more likely than white people to die of overdose And African Americans are overrepresented as well, but there's a whole lot of white folks dying from this crisis. And you know that's true as well. Just because one group is hit harder doesn't mean folks aren't hit at all. The overdose crisis knows no race, knows no color, knows no income. And we're all sadly in this together, although some may have worse numbers than others. So let me just talk to you about the process. You're going to hear more from Evan, this is Evan right here, about the process we've undertaken to reach an agreement with cities and counties to get them to sign on. But I want you to know that we've been working for months. Dave Baker's been working for years, and even years with cities and counties, both big and small, state folks, legislators, lawyers, community groups, tribal communities, doctors, nurses, everyone we can think of who has a stake in this to try to figure out a solution that works for everyone. In the final analysis, the one thing I do not want to be said is that we didn't try to talk to the whole state of Minnesota. We've held listening sessions with cities and counties, and maybe some of you were there. If you did, I want to thank you. In each of these meetings, we've tried to explain what's required of local governments in order to get the maximum amount of money to the state. We recently set up a panel of public health experts and community providers across the state to recommend what's best for the state as a whole in terms of distributing money. And the reason we went to those experts is because if you talk to the politicians, they're going to say, we need the most. No, we need the most. So we talked to some folks who do public health every day to give us some ideas. Using those recommendations, we're close to an agreement with cities and counties that will determine how funds are split up and distributed within Minnesota. We hope to be able to share that very soon. Not trying to hold anything back, just trying to tell you how we're doing, where we're going, progress that we're making. Now, structure of the settlements. Evan's going to share more about this, but for those of you who haven't heard it before, I want to give you a little information about the settlement agreements that are the reason that we have the money coming to us. Generally speaking, the two recent settlements involve claims against opioid companies related to marketing and distribution of opioids. Here's the structure of the settlement. The two settlements with three major national pharmaceutical distributors, Johnson & Johnson and Johnson & Johnson, provide up to $26 billion nationwide. $26 billion nationwide. Sounds like a lot of money. Well, when California and New York and Illinois and Texas get in there, you know, they're bigger, they've got more hits on them, they're probably going to take a share. We're going to get money, it will not be in the billions, it will be in the millions. It will not be sufficient to cover the losses that we have shared as a state personally. Minnesota's settlement could probably reach or exceed $300 million, but we need cities and counties to join in to get the maximum amount possible. And just to be clear, when folks say in Minnesota we don't want to be part of the settlement, then what Johnson & Johnson and the others will say is, okay, we need to hold some money back because we still got lawsuits to defend. But if we can resolve it all, then they say, here's it all. And so that's the way it's going to work. Minnesota's share, the settlements will reach about 300, as I said, but we need folks to join. We want to make sure that all of your members are informed about the settlement and have the ability to seek funding to address their opioid problems, even if they may not qualify for a direct share under these settlement terms. Now you say, well, what do you mean not qualify for a direct share? Well, if you have a city under a certain size, you still suffered the pain and you need some resources. There will be a pot that you can go to from the state to get the needs met that you have. Evan will explain that more as well. I have to make sure that you understand that not all of the cities in the state are going to be able to directly receive funds under the settlements, and it's all based on city size. Unfortunately, there's the resources are such that is the way the settlement is. No amount of money, I said, will make Minnesota's families whole, but it's important for you to understand the structure of the settlement and understand that everybody will have access to resources that they need and no one will be left out. There will never be enough funds to resolve the opioid epidemic, restitute victims that have been harmed by it, and bring the perpetrators to justice. But these resolutions deliver the maximum amount of value, transparency, and accountability. I want you to know that even though your city may get a direct share, or it may not based on size from the settlement, if you are a small rural city, we want the funds to go where they're needed. And we're working with the Coalition and the League of Minnesota Cities and the Association of Minnesota Counties to make sure that you get your needs met as well. As I said, we're close to an agreement, though not quite there yet, but regardless of the population of your city, you will be eligible to receive opioid remediation funds from the state's share of any funds. Also, we're setting up mechanisms that will help cities work with their counties on spending priorities. You have Narcan needs, other needs, we want to make sure they get met. So let me get down to what I'm asking you for. And I want to be real clear, I am asking you for something. It's in all of our collective interest to work together. I want to meet with you today, and I'm here to talk to you today for two important reasons. First, we need your help in advancing cooperation and participation of your cities, whose agreement and release of claims are essential to maximizing Minnesota's share of multi-state settlements. We've held listening sessions. We're happy to hold more once we have a final agreement, and we're available for individual questions from you. Second, we need to hear from you on what is needed to get the cities to help us to come together. We're working with the Coalition and the League on this, so you can certainly reach out to them, but also don't hesitate to communicate with us directly. So we need your help in advancing the cooperation to get as many folks to resolve this multi-state settlement as we can, and we need to hear from you as to what would persuade others to get us there. I think if you talk to Elizabeth or with Representative Baker or with anyone else who has spoken with us on the topic, you will see that our only interest is in maximizing the amount of money that comes to our state as a whole and getting it to where it is needed the most. We don't have an agenda except for trying to get as much money as we can from the state of Minnesota. We're not pushing for the state government to get an outsized share of any money. In fact, I'm agnostic on the point. We understand that money is needed in the communities and are going to do whatever it takes to get it there. But the cities, you all have the power to help get it done. So Minnesota cities have approximately till the end of the year to really make some decisions on this. We do hope that we can get maximum participation so we can get maximum settlement. And as I said, my priority is to get the money where the pain is. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Evan, who's going to share some thoughts with you all. Thank you for listening, Evan.
Thank you.
Thanks, Attorney General. I'm going to stay seated and also try to shout instead of using the mic. That's a good idea. Use the mic. Use the mic?
Yeah.
Okay, I got to click with one hand too, so it'll be a little awkward. That's okay. All right, thanks. Well, before I get started, I don't know, in my whole spiel, I don't know if Representative Baker wanted to add anything before I go. Sure, and we're hoping to leave plenty of time for questions as well. So I will try to speed through this. I did want to give sort of a little overview. By the way, I'm Evan Romanoff. I'm an Assistant Attorney General at the AG's office. I work in the, go ahead.
Speak into the microphone.
Yeah, let me hold it, that's okay. I work in the Consumer Wage and Antitrust Division at the office. I've been doing some of this opioid litigation for a while now. So just a very brief history here is just a few slides I put together on kind of our litigation history. Some of you may have been in some of our listening sessions. You might have heard this before, I apologize. But for those of you who haven't, just wanted to give you sort of a little bit of history on what we've done. So this just kind of goes over the two lawsuits we filed in the past couple years against opioid manufacturers. You can see here, Insys is one of them we sued a few summers ago. They made this fentanyl spray called Subsys, super potent spray, prescription fentanyl product, about 100 times more powerful than morphine. and supposed to only be prescribed for breakthrough cancer pain in the worst, in cancer patients. They were marketing it like well beyond that, and marketing it to pain doctors, general practice doctors, to write it for back pain, all kinds of pain. And they were paying kickbacks to those doctors to get them to write it. They were holding these so-called fraudulent speakers programs where they were basically paying doctors to increase their prescriptions. So we sued them a couple years ago. They ended up filing for bankruptcy in June of 2019 after their pretty much entire C-suite was criminally charged with kickbacks, and tons of doctors across the country were also criminally charged with accepting kickbacks and writing fraudulent prescriptions. So that they quickly ran out of money. Although that bankruptcy plan you can see here was confirmed early last year, there was essentially no money in the estate to pay litigants like us. We were one of maybe 10 or so states that sued them. So we also sued, as you can see here, Purdue Pharma, which I'm sure you've all heard of. They make OxyContin. That was a much broader lawsuit, really focused on sort of them creating a public nuisance, like really them creating the opioid epidemic in the country. So much more broadly focused than the kind of narrow focus that INSIS had. We also amended that lawsuit later on to add the Sackler family, which I'm sure you've all heard of, the infamous kind of owners of Purdue that stripped the company of its wealth, like INSIS, and seems to be the case with a lot of defendants, particularly in opioids these days. They filed for bankruptcy too, Purdue did, after the Sacklers pulled billions and billions of dollars out of the company, and they were being sued by pretty much every state in the country, thousands of cities, some of your cities, I'm sure. And we were sort of intimately involved in that bankruptcy, which recently is wrapping up. The plan was confirmed back in September of this year. So that's a little bit of our history. This is just showing you some of the settlements we've reached with opioid companies, just a list there. We put our website on there. We've dedicated a website specific to our opioids work where you can go to find out more information about not only the two most recent settlements that have all this money coming in, but some of the other work we've done in this realm as well. So Representative Baker is obviously much more, the expert on this, and much more able to talk about it than I am, but did want to briefly discuss that back a couple years ago, the legislature passed H.F. 400, this omnibus opioids bill, and what it did was it created a special account, an opioid account for state litigation and recoveries and state opioid fees. So typically speaking, money that the state gets as a result of a litigation or settlement or whatever has to go to the general fund. And what this bill did is create an exception to that transferred it directly to this opioids account to be used and restricted solely on opioid abatement rather than just however the legislature saw fit. So we were proud to help get that passed a couple years ago. It also created the Opioid Advisory Council, the Opioid Epidemic Response Advisory Council, which you may have heard referred to as ORAC, and they're the ones that oversee this fund. They make grant recommendations. They've worked really hard a couple years, led by Representative Baker here, on really leading how abatement's going to work in the state of Minnesota. So as I said, this is just lays out the statute that typically provides that funds recovered by the state go to the general fund. And here you can see sort of the exception. Obviously, you don't need to read that, but just a little bit of what I just said. You can see the statutory language there. So a little bit about the council. It's got 19 voting members statewide. They meet monthly. Recently, they've been doing so over Microsoft Teams. They have a meeting tomorrow. And you can see here sort of their statutory mandate. They're responsible for reviewing abatement programs, setting priorities, making funding recommendations. And as I said, they will oversee the state's share of the opioid settlement funds that come to the state. So a little bit more info on Purdue, on the bankruptcy here on this slide. We recently announced this settlement. As I mentioned, the plan was confirmed back in September. We announced it back in July that we reached a settlement with Purdue and the Sacklers in that bankruptcy. So in addition to payments, you can see here one of the main components of the deal, which our office particularly was extremely proud of, was this robust document disclosure. So the company, as part of this bankruptcy, is going to be required to turn over tens of millions of documents. Really an unprecedented level of document disclosure, including thousands of privileged documents that they have with their lawyers, explaining how they came up with their marketing scheme. And then the idea is obviously to not only accountability, but prevention. Hopefully those documents will help researchers, educators, et cetera, the general public show how the opioid epidemic came about and hopefully prevent something like that from happening again. So also, obviously, the bankruptcy plan is going to result in a large payment from the estate. The Sacklers themselves, because as I said, they stripped Purdue of most of its money, so Purdue doesn't have much money, but the Sacklers are going to be paying out of their personal, their personal wealth over $4 billion nationwide. So that doesn't add up to all that much for Minnesota. Our share is about $56 million, you can see here, and it's going to be spread over 9 or 10 years. We also get in sort of another revenue stream with Purdue's assets through the next few years. The injunctions, you can just see some other injunctive relief, not just money and document disclosure, but a couple other things listed there as part of the settlement, what's required. So our goal in all our opioid litigation and settlements is that the money that's recovered needs to be used for purposes of opioid abatement, right? For treatment, prevention, et cetera. So that's part of this Purdue bankruptcy plan. The funds have to be used for those purposes. There's monitoring requirements. The default, both in the Purdue bankruptcy and in the next two settlements I'm going to talk about where all this money is coming from, provides the default allocation scheme, provides that 85% of the money goes to the state and then 15% to local government. So that's the default under these plans. There's a lot of flexibility in them for states to craft their own specific abatement programs with their cities and counties. So that's what we've been trying to do and reach sort of a state subdivision agreement to change that allocation scheme and to kind of determine how the funds are going to be spent. And obviously it's been important for us to have input and representation from local governments to get that done. So the two big deals, distributors, the three main national distributors in Johnson & Johnson, the recent settlements that Attorney General Ellison was mentioning that provide for $26 billion, that assumes a lot. It assumes 100% national participation. So $26 billion is not guaranteed. But you can see here kind of if that were to come about, how the money is divvied out. The distributors are set to pay the vast majority of it, $21 billion. However, it's over 18 years. J&J is going to be paying about $5 billion over 10 years, and that's much more heavily front-loaded. Again, same as Purdue, the default allocation structure is 85 state, 15 local governments, but the same flexibility to change it with crafting a state-specific agreement, which we've been working to do. So obviously, Attorney General Ellison mentioned that the companies want global peace in order to pay this money, and they've incentivized, they've set up these deals in order to help them reach that. So the state of Minnesota, and every state for that matter, and the subdivisions essentially get more money the more cities and counties that sign on. So global peace for the companies means they want cities and counties to release the claims of liability that they have. So those from cities and counties, like some of you that may have already sued, I think in Minnesota we have 7 cities that have sued, as well as those of you who haven't sued, you're required in order to get these funds to release potential future claims that you might have. Not all cities, you can see here it's only a requirement of those with greater than 10,000 population. So you can see here how to get that global peace done is, the pathways are really, one of the most important one is obviously contractual, voluntary agreement to release claims. So cities and counties agree to sign on, and that's what we're here working toward and what we've been trying to work toward. So as I said, this incentive structure, these settlements are kind of a carrot and stick method. The payments are divided into base and bonus. So the base payment is only about 50% of these deals that came from us as a state of Minnesota signing on. So that up to $300 million that Attorney General Ellison was mentioning, we only earned about half of that by us signing on as a state. In fact, even a little less. Most of the money comes from these bonus payments, which require cities and counties to sign on. And it's kind of complex, but it's really, we earn more from the extent of resolution by cities and counties that sign on to these deals. So I said it's complicated, not going to read this to you, you don't have to read it, we can share these slides certainly, but this just goes into some of the detail to how the bonus structure works. I'm sure you probably can't even read it, even if you wanted to. So we can send this out, and I think Elizabeth already has it, so she can certainly feel free to share it. But there's different bonuses here, there's different requirements to meet them. Some of them have to do with those that are getting sign-on from cities that have already sued. Some of them with cities that haven't sued. There's, as I said, there's sticks. So if a city that doesn't sign on later sues, the state loses money later. It's pretty complicated, but the gist is the more cities and counties that sign on, the more money the state gets. So obviously that just brings us to this slide where cities are essential. Full participation is going to maximize the funds. You can see here we've been trying to figure out and working to figure out a plan that works for everyone in Minnesota to change that sort of 85-15 default, and we've been working directly with the coalition, with the League of Minnesota Cities, the Association of Minnesota Counties to figure out that plan. So how have we, how have we done that? This just goes into the settlement terms. It shows what's required to reach a state subdivision agreement. Again, that's sort of an excerpt from the settlement, not going to read it to you. But the settlements require that funds be distributed according to state law or an intra-state agreement. We don't have state law here in Minnesota that allocates funds, between the state and local governments, so we're stuck with this sort of state subdivision agreement unless we want to go with this 85-15 default, which we don't. So what we've done, as Attorney General Ellison mentioned, is set up this expert panel. You can see here an excerpt from the purpose statement of the panel. It met, I think, over 6 weeks. It wrapped up its work at the beginning of November. We didn't want the money, the allocation and the distribution of the money to be figured out by lawyers, politicians, et cetera. Like, we wanted the public health experts, community providers, boots on the ground, you all, people in your communities, to figure out the best, to tell us, to recommend the best way that these funds should be spent. So that's what this panel did. It came up with a series of recommendations, and now that brings us to the next step, what we're doing with those recommendations. We've set up this subsequent panel we're calling the signers table, and it has taken those recommendations of the expert panel, as well as proposals that counties have made. The state has its own proposal that via agencies in the governor's office, and trying to sort of incorporate them into a term sheet, like an agreement, the state subdivision agreement that we're hoping to finalize pretty soon. And so that's what this signers table is doing. It's cities and counties are sitting there, it's their lawyers, the coalition's on it, the League of Minnesota Cities, the Association of Minnesota Counties, all have representation on this table. So we're trying to hammer out a deal. It's kind of a difficult spot. We hoped that we were coming here today to announce like some kind of deal was done, but we're just not there yet. We're trying to figure out. Okay.
Going on.
Check.
Is there another one? Oh. Thanks. This working?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. So the signers table, you can see here the deadline, January 2nd, 2022. That's the initial date that subdivisions need to sign on to these settlements in order to reach a deal. So that's coming up. We're kind of on a tight time frame. But as I said, the default is 85-15. We don't have this finalized yet, but I wanted to just let you all know where it's likely going to land. Again, not done. But it's likely going to be around 75-25 the other way. So in fact, where we're at is the state's share is likely going to be about 25% versus local governments directly getting 75%. So that kind of really flips the default structure, and that's based on recommendations from that public health expert panel that told us how money is spent and how the epidemic has really fought in Minnesota. We've learned it's really local governments that lead the fight on this. So that's why the term sheet is going to be set likely around that allocation structure. So you're all, I'm sure, wondering what's in it for cities to sign on. As I said, the more of you that do, the more money we get as a whole. Obviously, it's going to be a bigger pot. We're working on, we don't have this done yet, unfortunately, but you can see here the second bullet point here is direct share for cities. We don't know which cities yet. We haven't finalized which cities are going to be eligible to get that direct share. And as Attorney General Ellison mentioned, it's likely not everyone's going to be eligible for a direct share. But we're trying to work mechanisms into the agreement to have collaboration with counties. Counties are going to be required to consult with cities within those counties on spending options and programs and strategies like that. So we're working on that. There's more forthcoming, so stay tuned on that. Obviously this will all be circulated to you once we have it, and we're asking your communities to sign on. And we're certainly happy to talk again with you all and sort of explain more in more detail at that point. Also, as Attorney General Ellison mentioned, ORAC is going to be distributing the state's share of funds. Cities can certainly are eligible to apply for grants via ORAC to the extent they're not directly getting a share. So another way that funds will be able to be distributed to your cities. The bottom here is just a little language in sort of the draft we've got now around that kind of consultation piece. Again, not finalized, but we're working on it. So how to sign on? You got to register your city at this website. It's in nationalopioidsettlement.com. You should have all gotten, actually not all of you, those over 10,000 probably a couple months ago would have gotten notice, a letter with our letterhead on it, the AG's letterhead, pointing you to this website with a unique subdivision registration code for your city. So you got to go to that website and register with that code to sign to get more information. You should all do that regardless of whether whether you're intending to sign on to the actual deal or not. That's kind of a required first step. So it doesn't commit you to anything. It doesn't commit you to signing on to the settlements, but it's required in order to get this participation packet, which is sort of the excerpt here at the bottom. That's the actual participation form that you all should consult with your councils, your administrators on, et cetera, that you need to get. That's the actual legal binding document that you release your claims. So you can't get that though unless you register at this website. So questions, there's this National Opioid Settlement website that has a really helpful FAQ that I encourage you all to read. If you want to learn more about the settlements, you can read the settlements themselves. To the extent you are glutton for punishment, they're like 600 pages, but if you want to, go there and read the settlements. You can also contact us. We've got our website here we've set up. I said we've got like a dedicated email line that the lawyers working on this opioid stuff monitor and answer, and then this dedicated telephone number for opioids too. It's like an opioids voicemail. Leave a voicemail, we'll get back to you. With that, I wanted to open it up to questions and also invite Representative Baker to speak.
So you get me twice today, sorry. And I want to just say a couple of things about my role in this ORAC group. I'm currently the interim chair of this group. It's again, it's a panel that was made after House File 400 that I was one of the chief authors on, and we're one of the very first states that won against the pharmaceutical companies to increase licensing fees. If you want to sell opioids and prescription drugs in Minnesota, everybody was paying $250 a year to sell all the drugs they wanted to in Minnesota. And when you've got a bar and grill and whatever, they're paying $2,000 to $5,000, in your own cities. They're paying a lot of money for one bar to sell liquor, which can be a problem in this society, again. Ended up, opioids are doing the same thing. So that was the mentality we did. So our goal was to try to raise about $20 million a year of new revenue for Minnesota that was going to go towards this ORAC group, that we could do things in communities to help with the addiction problem. Knowing fully we were going to see some lawsuits coming down the road because there were some really bad players we could see coming for a lot of years. My son Dan died 10 years ago of an opioid overdose. He started with a back injury like you've heard 100 times. If you haven't watched the movie, you're watching the movie Dope Sick right now on Hulu, watch it. It's really good because it's the real story of how the Sacklers did what they did. It's a good movie. And I will tell you, there's also a YouTube video out there right now for cities that I've been sharing. It's called Know the Truth on YouTube, and it's about the fentanyl issue right now that's in front of us. And again, all this is stemming from folks that are trying to get off of opioids, the heroin epidemic, but right now the drugs are killing us left and right. As Attorney General Ellison said, 100,000 people in the United States last year. It's incredible. The one thing I wanted to mention is all the lawyer stuff that Evan and Keith just mentioned. It has been a very complex lawsuit with a lot of states, a lot of counties and the cities, and we need to figure out then how we in Minnesota take this in and actually do the best job we can with it. I really want to give these guys credit because Keith Ellison called me about 2 years ago. And he told me, and I remember exactly where I was sitting in my car. I pulled up to my restaurant, and I remember I got a call from Keith Ellison. Oh, it's a pretty big deal. And he told me he was pretty excited about this lawsuit coming. I said, I think we're getting close to a deal. And I exactly remember, I remember my comment back to him as, because he didn't really talk about money, but he was kind of I could feel he was happy about, excited about this. We're finally going to bring some closure, maybe. It's been a long time. And I just said, I don't care what the amount is. Keith, I don't care. You just make damn sure we find out what the hell went on here. And he didn't say anything for like 15 seconds. And again, I think ever since that moment, we've had this connection because I get him on this issue. Politically, I don't agree with him on a whole lot of things. But I respect him a lot. But I'm telling you this, he gets this. And he's working his tail off, and his team has been working really hard on this. And I appreciate him very much on working for Minnesota to try to bring in the most we can. And he's got great people like Evan and Eric and Carly behind the scenes working to bring us together on the ORAC team that has been working already for 2 years to try to bring up the policy so we can get it to communities. So when you do get some money, or when we get the money in ORAC funds, we will have support for you. So the one thing I want to leave you with is your communities aren't going to be subject matter experts on opioids and addiction. You're not supposed to really be doing that. You have so many issues to deal with. This ORAC group is a thing that's under the DHS and Minnesota Department of Health. I call it the motherboard in Minnesota. It has been something that I have obviously been working on since the inception of the bill, and this is where the work really is happening on this group. We've got prescription, we've got addiction docs, we've got people in long-term recovery, we've got providers, we've got attorneys, we've got the agency's representative, we've got director of Department of Corrections. They're all there because everywhere we've got problems when it comes to addiction, and again, especially when it comes to the opioid stuff. So we are going to show you ways, when we get this money coming in, it's going to be up to 15, 16, 18 years of money coming in, some different levels, but we're going to try to make some good things happen for our cities and our counties. We also realize our counties, every one of them belongs to a county, and every one of our counties has public health, and they know how to deliver services to our residents close at hand. So we know they are absolute critical partners in this. But the Attorney General's office has done a really nice job bringing the right people together to get a very complex agreement. So when you're asked to sign off on this, I'm asking you to trust me as the chair of the ORAC group to listen to the advice of what we're doing so we can get the best outcome we can for the state of Minnesota, get as many documents so we find